chat screen or in the chat area. So check out the schedule for the other workshops or webinars as well. Sorry, Johan, go ahead.
All right. Do you want? I guess I'll start then, and Fredrik continues.
Yes.
Great. So, hello everybody. My name is Johan Blad. I work at Energiföretagen Sverige, which translates to Swed Energy. We are a business association representing Swedish energy companies. That's the short version. And I'm responsible for the hydropower, all the hydropower questions in Swed Energy. So just starting with some basic facts, with a map of Sweden, of the Nordic countries, just to see where the hydropower plants are located. This shows production, and the blue circles are, or the blue color is hydropower. Just to give you an idea, most of you know already that it's located up in the far north. In the south, you have nuclear and some conventional thermal, and then in Norway, the large hydropower resources on the west coast. Most of our plants were built in the 1950s and to the 1970s. Today we have around 16.2 gigawatts of capacity, 700 plants larger than 1.5 megawatts, and 1,800 smaller plants. Very few pumped storage power plants in Sweden, only 3, very small ones. Annual production is around 65 terawatt hours a normal year, and no new builds to expect. Major remaining rivers are protected by environmental laws. This picture to the right shows a typical Swedish river, and some characteristics of Nordic hydropower. They are mixed reservoir type and cascading schemes, and the flexibility of the Nordic hydropower resource is through a large power to energy ratio that is conversely then a low utilization factor and intermediate reservoirs. The hydropower resource of the Nordic countries has a very large ability to balance net load variations on all time scales, from seconds to seasons and even years. The total storage capacity in the Nordics is 120 terawatt hours, and I already said that we have very few pump storage plants. You can look at the, just to get an idea, this image shows the Luleå River. And one of the large top reservoirs, the Sorva reservoir, contains around 7 terawatt hours of energy. And it's interesting to remember that the Nordic or the Swedish hydropower plants were reservoirs and plants. They were built for a particular purpose and dimension to fulfill that purpose, and that was mostly to balance seasonal variations and day and night variations. So I don't know if you can see my pointer here, but the blue curve here is what the system is designed for. Regular variations, fairly small, and then on top of that, the seasonal variation between winter and summer. Now we are building a lot of wind power, and the characteristics of the net load is changing slowly. And note that if this is a simulated curve picturing the situation in 2050, notice that the wind power variations are much longer. So they are larger in amplitude and much longer in time, stretching over multiple days, and they do not follow any particular pattern. So I think that's an important thing to remember in the following discussion. So we're building a lot of wind power, and I also want to make this point that in a future system where we have a lot of wind power, hydropower is a perfect resource to balance all this wind power. The Nordic hydropower system has naturally very good properties to balance large amounts of wind power. But there will be something else as well, I think. So I left the 1/3 of the of the image blank. So it's up to you to guess what it will be filled with. That was 5 minutes approximately, I think. Bjarne, what do you? I have a few more slides. I don't know. Do you want? Shall we let Fredrik in?
Yes, let's get Fredrik in, and if it's you can then go back to your slides if you have some points to the discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, let me share my screen then. Yes. That one maybe. Okay, so you see my slides, or at least the first one?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so thank you very much, Johan and Bjarne. My name is Fredrik Engström. I'm the Director of Business Control and Asset Management with Vattenfall's business unit Hydro Nordic, where we are responsible for the Nordic hydro fleet. So that's basically Sweden, but also a few plants in Finland. I'm also the chairman of the program committee for Swedish Hydropower Center, SVC. And also on the executive committee for Hydroflex, so I'm sort of exactly in the middle of this. But I would just like to start with basically one slide, except for this one. Let's see if I can also change it. Oops, there we go. Revealing too much at the same time. There we go. Just to comment and maybe connect also to what Johan said about basically this year and how this year is also changing our thinking about what we're doing now in the Nordic system, especially. First off, this has been a very strange year. It's basically a wet year. And we know that means low energy prices typically, and that has really been the case this year. It's also been a windy year and quite warm year, the first part of the first half of the year at least. And then of course we have the third, in Swedish it would work with the fourth V, but here it would be the fourth W, but it's the virus that we all know about that also came on top of the first three challenges to the energy prices. And the snapshot up to the left is basically how the electricity prices have evolved during most part of this year. It's from March, basically when also Corona hit the Nordic market and up until this date. And what you can see from the yellow curve, which is the Nordic system price, so that's basically what the electricity price would be without any bottlenecks in the grid. You can maybe see from the small digits there it's been well down below 100 SEK per megawatt hour, so that would be approximately 10 euros per megawatt hour. And especially if you see the pattern from during the summer, June, July, August, it's been very, very low. But what you can also see are the price areas in Sweden, or at least two of the four. So the black one, price area 1, which is where the Luleå River that Johan showed is located. So the top fourth of Sweden, basically. Biggest production source there is the Luleå River, basically, but we have increasing amounts of wind power also. We have the blue curve, which is sort of the most populated price area of Sweden, where we also have our nuclear power in Vattenfall. And historically, we haven't seen so much difference between these price areas, but this year has really been an exception, but maybe also a new normal. So as you can see, the blue curve has been steadily above the yellow curve for most part of the time, with some really high prices there in the middle of the summer even. The black curve, however, which represents most of our production, has been closer to the yellow one. Some deviations there during the summer as well, but basically very, very low. With the exception of this fall, there was a general increase in prices, but also that the area differences have maybe become smaller now during the last few weeks. What we should realize, which is not in these curves, is that Norwegian operators have seen prices well below the yellow curve, so we have still been on the lucky side here. So obviously bottlenecks in the grid has something to do with what we get paid for our energy when it comes to electricity, but that also says something about our ability to support also the flexibility in the system. Oops. Down to the left, and I have a blow up of this if we want to dive into it. Just looked at the last few days and the production pattern that we have seen, because the impression so far is basically in Johan's curve, the 2015 curve, which was sort of the regular night and day operations for hydropower. That's still, I would say, our impression that is what's happening still. That's the big flexibility is for us is day and night plus ancillary services. And where do all the wind power go? Well, it sort of is absorbed somewhere in between. It's not the big flexibility still to keep track of the wind power. But we can actually see that now, and I found just the last week, and this is in the middle of the week, so no weekends involved here, the September 15th through 17th. What you see, the colored things on top, that's where we have the Nordic production. So the big blue stuff is of course hydropower, and you can see the day and night variation for 3 days. In the bottom you have nuclear, and then you have thermal, the yellow, and then the reddish pink color is wind power. There you can see from the 15th, we came from basically no wind power at all in the Nordic system up until then on the 16th, where I think it's more than 10 gigawatts of wind power in the Nordic system. And the black curve below is actually our total production those same days. And you can see the first day, the 15th, is quite typical for us. Low production at night, high production during the day, and you see the sort of the morning and the evening peaks. But then it's obvious that something happens on the 16th and partly on the 17th that really correlates well with the wind power. So we do actually see a high impact on wind power in our production already. We mostly discuss this due to the price development, that we say that in the next few days we expect maybe little wind or a lot of wind, and then that will affect the prices, and we try to optimize based on that. But of course this translates also in some way to starts and stops, using the flexibility of our operating range in our power plants, and of course also ancillary services that are probably in higher demand when this occurs. So we do see this change, and of course extrapolating then to Johan's curve in 2050, that will mean something quite different. And it has been a special year in many cases. This was the year when the Swedish grid owner paid Vattenfall to restart a nuclear block to be able to manage the grid stability. In Sweden, it's been a debate, at least in our line of business, for some time now about that we have a surplus in energy, but we have question marks when it comes to peak capacity and stability in the grid. And this was the year when that discussion really took another leap. And this is from the news when our energy minister, Anders Ygeman, said that there must be a market to buy and sell such ancillary services. And of course, there is somewhat a market for this, but this was also addressing inertia that we just heard about also in the presentation. We don't have any markets for inertia. It's basically a hidden requirement for our generators, but it's not sort of applied to wind power. But now we see maybe that also authorities and the government start to see the value in this, and also then must look for a market or some kind of remuneration for this to get the incentives to keep the stability in the system. And of course, we have a lot of hydropower basically in the northern part of Sweden. The nuclear here is in the southern part of Sweden, and basically we have bottlenecks that makes it difficult for us to get full use of our flexible resource for the rest of Sweden. Not to say transferring that over to Europe. So I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you, Fredrik. I can just add to your comment about the strange year. I think you are absolutely right. And just to add for those who are not aware that actually in Norway, this year in some regions we saw negative prices, not only low prices, but for first time some hours with negative prices. So that's something one observed previously in Denmark, but never in the Norwegian regions before. I'll use the privilege as a moderator to ask a few questions first myself, and then I'll open up for the audience also to come in. But I would like both of you first to comment, let's say, my impression prior to having seen these results from the work package and the simulations before is that at least most of the Norwegian, let's say, power or people working in the trading and working in predicting the market in Norway was saying that the driver for this increased need for flexibility was mainly driven by the increased capacity in interconnectors and then the large amount of intermittent renewable in Europe. We've heard today that maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's more the development of these intermittent renewable sources in the Nordic region itself. You partly commented on this already, Fredrik, but do you recognize that picture or want to comment on that picture?
I think that is what we're seeing, and I think for some years I've been surprised that we don't really then feel the impact, because of course we see the huge, especially wind power expansion in the Nordics, which is now a really substantial part of our energy supply. But I wouldn't say that we really feel it, that it's sort of, it's not like we're shutting down half of our fleet when it's a really windy few days. So it's not on that level. But as I just shown in the curves, it is there, definitely. And I think on top of our sort of the old school or legacy day and night variation that's still there and still sort of the big thing still, we're really starting to see the impact. Maybe not to the degree that we can say that has increased these number of start and stops or more flexible, but maybe there's some more analysis for us to do there as well. But I would say that basically it's my impression is that we have the intermittent renewables that is what is changing right now. Of course, we still haven't seen anything when it comes to the demand side, where there's been a lot of discussions the last few years, and of course will be more when it comes to electrical vehicles and other possibilities to change the demand and have some kind of demand response. So that will sort of be on the other side of hydropower, also working on this flexibility.
Johan, when you're talking with the members in Sweden Energy, how are they seeing the future?
When I talk to Fredrik, that's what I hear. No, but it's a similar sort of picture all across the companies, I think. But I don't think I think we have our own problems to deal with the congestions in the grid and internal congestions in the grid, that we don't really get the hydropower down to the southern parts of Sweden. And as Fredrik said, that has implications on our ability to support the northern part of Europe as well. So I don't really know if the German or the sort of the European solar, for instance, if that is experienced in the southern part of Sweden in SE4. But I don't really think that it transmits all the way up to the northern part where the most of the hydro is located.
We see from when they're looking at these reference plants that we see maybe a slight increase in the number of start-stops, but not like 30 start-stops per day. That was the outset of the project. How do you feel? You're close to the operator, or as an operator, you're close to the power plant. So do you recognize these numbers and the trends, or do you think, do they, yeah, is it fitting the numbers?
Are you asking Frederick now, I think?
Yeah, I wouldn't, as I remember indicated, nothing that sort of has been coming up as a big issue that we have seen increased start to stop. Now I know that I have several colleagues here who could maybe develop on that. But as I said, sort of it's been the discussion that now we have wind power, so we are running hydropower very differently. But I don't think we have seen that. But probably if we would look more detailed in the trends, we should probably start to see something, since I showed those curves. That must, of course, translate to that we maybe either didn't start the unit or ran the unit on a different output, or maybe started and stopped a unit more often than we would have. But if it's sort of still we start and stop a number of units at least once a day and maybe several times a day, and do we see a marginal increase that can be correlated to wind power? Not that we have seen, but maybe there's something that we haven't found yet in the trends.
Well, I remember I questioned this premise of the call, 30 starts and stops per day, because I don't really understand where it would come from, considering that the wind power variations are much slower. I think they will slow down the pattern of the hydropower operation, and possibly other technologies like battery-based technologies, which are inherently much faster, will take care of the smaller variations. And I think so. I don't really think we will see that increase, and if we do, I think it's more connected to planning mistakes, correcting for production planning mistakes, timing issues, rather than wind power variations. And of course, I mean, forecast uncertainties, that is an issue that must be taken care of. So maybe that will increase the number of starts and stops, but I think the volumes are still quite low if you compare to the variations themselves.
But this is where you can look at the Hydroflex project in a different manner, because as you and I have discussed several times, Johan, a big uncertainty for the hydropower industry right now, I would say, when it comes to flexibility, is new technology that comes in. We're starting also in our company to build big battery parks, mainly to manage local congestion in the grid. But of course, this can serve different ancillary services also. We have demand response coming in some way, not clear really how the incentives will be there to help to stabilize the grid, but it's a possibility. And I guess Hydroflex is also sort of starting at the quite extreme 30 start and stop idea level, is also to see that, okay, but if hydropower is going to play a role here that it hasn't played before, what would that look like? Would it be possible? What would it require? Because then we will be maybe also compete with new technology in a different way. Or it could be in the other way that we say that, yeah, we don't see that we will ever do that many starts and stops. And even if we should, we wouldn't go for that technology because it would be too expensive or not reliable or so. And then we will know that maybe we are stepping out of parts of the market that we are in today and let other technology do that work. But this is a way to also find out that what are the possibilities. I think that's also important.
And I think it will come down to the cost, really. Who can correct for these variations at the lowest cost? if you can do it cheaper with hydro, you should do it with hydro. If you can do it cheaper with some other technology, you should. I mean, you will take care of it that way. So.
And I think,
yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just to comment one more thing. I think a few years back it was said that with increase and expansion of wind power, you will sort of get a natural average of wind power production, so you won't get these really big dips and big ramps and so on. But I guess just looking at the slide, the graph I showed, it's quite obvious that low pressure systems are are spanning across the entire Nordic region. So it will be windy everywhere or windy nowhere. That's not unusual. So that natural average will not really be there on at least sort of Nordic level. Then a different thing if you look at maybe a European level. I think that's also something that we are learning.
Yes, but I think to comment to that is that, I mean, I've seen some results when there was like a big storm going over the whole of the Iberian Peninsula, where both Spain and Portugal was shutting down all wind power, and that was quite dramatic drop in this region as well. So, but just finally, before I open up, because I think to Johan, I mean, my impression is that when the call was formed, it came out from a period. We saw that in Norway, we had around 2010 up to maybe 2013 or something. There was a big discussion about Norway as a battery for Europe, Switzerland as a battery for Europe, and Austria as a battery for Europe. So there was a large focus on this, extrapolating what we were seeing with an increasing dynamic operation and seeing that it would increase dramatically. So I think the call was formed in that, let's say, spirit.
But I think you're right about the battery thing, but the battery is so much larger, so it's more suited to handle these longer, bigger, slower variations.
Yes, okay, yeah, but that's directly my answer, is that maybe that we have to shift that formulation of the the battery thought. It's not that explosive power, but more providing energy on longer time scales. That's maybe will be the focus.
But have you seen maybe some, I don't know if you and maybe Ole Gunnar and others more closer to the Norwegian side, if, as you say, this was the reason for the call, and that call was a few years ago, if you sort of, if those trends have been more pronounced now, or if it's something else.
Can I comment on that, Björn?
Yes, go ahead.
I think when we started the project, I all think it was unrealistic to have 30 start-stops. I think we all agreed to that. And we, a few years earlier, when we ran another project in Trondheim called the High Head Francis turbine project, we checked how often it actually had happened. And I think the conclusion was that the maximum start-stops per day was 3, wasn't it, Björn? I think that was the highest we could hear. And to be honest, I haven't heard about anything happening more frequent today either. So the trend is not moving in the direction of more starts and stops. No. But again, our system is, we are overloaded with energy, so we don't. It's too much right now, and we don't. But I think you should try to look at IEA hydropower. They have a report talking about or focusing about hydropower, the economic value of energy and water management services provided by hydropower projects. And they look into what has happened other places. And they focus on how much intermittent energy should be in a system before you see that hydropower, for example, has a value. And it surprised me that it was so high. They say that it should be up to 40% intermittent energy in a system before you can see that there is a huge demand or a demand for services like hydropower. And the report are available on IEA's website, so you can see it if you like. But everything now, everything we're doing now, especially within European Energy Research Alliance, and the things that are discussed in Europe is hydropower as an enabler of more renewables. And that is the same thing. It requires more flexibility. Maybe not 30 start-stops, but more flexibility, that's for sure. I think it's a step in the right direction, even though it's a quite extreme step. But it's a good case to show.
Can I comment on that, Bjarne?
Yes, go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right, Ole Gunnar. I think you should widen the scope of flexibility, or the flexibility definition. It was quite wide when in the early presentation here, I noticed, but then we're only discussing these short timescales, and it's much wider than that. I think it's both the very short timescales with ancillary services and pure capacity, inertia and that frequency control and voltage control and everything, and then all the way up to balancing seasonal variations. And I think connecting to what Fredrik said earlier, that they don't really see it yet. I think we're still moving within the range of this, at least the Swedish hydropower, and I'm sure the Norwegian as well. We're moving within the range that can be handled still, and therefore we don't really see the big effects yet. But as we build more and more wind power, we are getting closer to some limit where we will start seeing these effects. I don't really think that it's linear, that it comes slowly. We will just pass some. We will start see it more and more often, these price spikes, when the hydropower capacity or transmission capacity is not enough.
Yeah.
But as long as we move within the range, then the price variations are quite modest, because the hydropower is so effective dampening them out. So.
And of course, with that comes the incentives or lack of incentives to expand that capability currently, because we don't see the remuneration for that kind of extra capacity.
And when you build that capacity, the price
incentive goes
variation,
away.
It goes away. Yeah. Tough business case.
Exactly. Again, I just repeat, if you have any questions, please just grab the word. But in the meantime, I mean, Marius and Aachen, generally, they spoke about flexibility, or the need for flexibility to balance the frequency. But in some sense, you can say that, so that's in some sense the technical requirements that is the TSO are serving. But as you're saying, there is also this flexibility. You want to utilize utilize the volatility in the market, so that you can save and don't produce spillwater when the prices are low, and utilize this volatility.
And that is,
yeah. My question was, maybe that is even more important driver for flexibility, or you wanting to have flexibility installations for the owners at least.
Obviously, the frequency issues and all that and stability issues are very important to consider, of course, and hydropower is a good resource to handle those sorts of issues as well. But there are also it can be competition from other technologies, but these longer variations, there are not really any alternatives. Or if you have hydropower, that will be the cheapest way to handle them. So. But it's a matter, as you say, it's more a matter of river design to adapt to these new the new operation pattern, to redesign or redimension hydropower plants and reservoirs to work optimally in this new energy system.
Niklas Dahlbeck here. I can continue what Johan is going on to. It's the focus on number of start-stops may be a little off. It's not the number of start-stops, it's more the amplitudes that are a challenge. And the other part that was in the early presentation, that it's not regularly patterned. These two are not challenging the equipment. It's challenging the water, the rivers,
and the environment.
The environment. So I think there's the big issue if you are coming in. It's not just challenging by the increase of the amplitude, it's also by the pattern. Due to that, we can't say that we should do the regular pattern that is good for ecological. We are going up and down in any time, and that if the ecological an increase of flow in the nighttime is bad, we can't guarantee that now. So it's a very much more focus on that part, and that is missed a little when you're going too much into the equipment.
Yeah, it's a good point. Just to add to that also, I think from a society point of view, it's even if the power companies really loves if it's high power prices and the public loves if it's low power price, I think trying to have stable power prices at a reasonable level should be a goal in itself, because it's both more predictable, but also you avoid these extreme impacts when suddenly what we're seeing this year, for instance, in Norway is a lot of, I mean, most of the power companies are publicly owned, and suddenly the budgets are slashed and they either have to increase the taxes or they have to close down public services. So it's even if people are happy for a short time, in the long run, it have a severe impact on the society. Would you like to comment or?
Well, obviously, to have also energy production in the future, it has to be profitable in some way. So, and then of course, sort of big variations, but short in time, could of course be managed by hedging and so on. And I assume that that's what's happening also in Norway. But this maybe connects to a challenge in Sweden and thereby in the Nordic system, that we are phasing out some of our nuclear at least, and of course that was part of the issue with the situation this summer that caused some debate and some problems, because we have to, with decreasing nuclear, we also have to decrease the transmission capacity within Sweden to be able to make sure it's stable, and that of course then locks in also the Swedish hydropower. But sort of extrapolating that into the future, when we phase out more nuclear, of course there will be new nuclear in Finland eventually. Then the question is, okay, so where will the market point hydropower to go? With the decreasing sort of energy capacity, will then hydropower in general get a higher value for sort of base load, and will that then take away capacity from sort of more capacity market, ancillary services, and maybe spot market flexibility hour to hour, because we say that no, we'd rather just stay steady and run like old nuclear, because nuclear typically runs quite stable. Sometimes we feel that hydropower will sort of be answer to everything in the sort of developing energy system. A lot more intermittent renewables, less nuclear, new technology on the demand side, and hydropower will be able to solve everything. But of course, hydropower will go where the revenues are. So, so I can see that we could take really different turns there. Then, of course, the big thing with hydropower is the flexibility in general. So we could be on different markets, but what does that say about future prices? That's yeah, I think that's difficult to guess.
We shouldn't forget the load side either. In Sweden, we are looking at scenarios now with massive increases in load, like 50 terawatt hours over the coming, I don't know, 30 years or something. We're looking at 200 terawatt hours of load in 2050 or something. And some of that is expected to be flexible, but they have the same issues as hydropower to get, if they are building, for instance, this hybrid project that Vattenfall is involved with, producing hydrogen to produce steel in the end. They also they have costs if they want to dimension their equipment to be flexible. and so they have the same issue there.
Yeah, no, I think it's the same in Norway. If you look at today with our commitment for the Paris Agreement, etc., we are also converting a lot of the energy use, which is based on non-renewable to electrification or through electrification to renewable. So we are also forecasting a significant increase in electrical demand. In addition, as we have new industries like several projects for large battery fabrics and also large server farms, etc. So we see also new kind of power demanding industry. There was a question, Chirag, do you want to pose the question yourself, or it's a question regarding if one should try to specialize the units more for particular, so dedicate special plants for flexibility?
You want to answer, Fredrik, the plant owner?
Yeah, I can try. That's I actually been thinking a bit about that just during this discussion, because if you look at Johan showed a schematic view of the Luleå River, which is the most flexible river in Sweden, and well, really flexible on all accounts. And this is somewhere where we can start and stop every night and day 1,000 to 2,000 megawatts. So it is very flexible. And of course, that's quite unique, and that's something that we could. Of course, we are all in to sort of keep that capability, and that could be some kind of specialization. That this is where we want to really be able to be flexible, and that's been the aim for quite some time, of course. But maybe increase that kind of flexibility to, if we can stop maybe 1,500 megawatts, can we go to 2,000 megawatts, and so on. And what are the time scales? Are the time scales 1 to 3 days for a typical wind power pattern, or is it on shorter terms that we can do that? Well, we have other rivers where it's we have different owners of different power plants, and it's quite a mess to be able to optimize the production plans between all the owners, and maybe they are not so flexible from the start. Maybe they're just try to optimize sort of cost-efficient production instead, and stay away from large flexibility. And then you come sort of to what is the marginal cost for flexibility, and that's also an irritatingly difficult question. So to answer your question, Chirag, yeah, I think that will. I think the first big question is, what kind of flexibility should we be aiming for going forward? Should it be the same as today, sort of a mix between ancillary services and spot market flexibility for hours up to days and weeks and seasons? I think that's the first part. Are we being competed out of the ancillary services market? Okay, so let's then focus on sort of wind power, adjusting to different wind power capacities or production. But the next step of that is, of course, then to address different power plants and say that let's just strip off the ancillary services from this power plant and just have it go as base load in some respect. So I think that is where we could go.
I agree. I listed actually three points when it comes to increasing flexibility, which I think is important. The first is to understand the future operation patterns, to sort of analyze scenarios and make simulations on the river and see what type of demand the different plants will sort of serve. And the other is extending the operation range. That I think is more important than the start and stop, to be able to operate in a wider range, flow range. And the third point is understanding wear and tear mechanisms and associated costs that Fredrik also mentioned, to understand what it actually costs to provide all these flexibility services and make sure you get paid for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably I can just add a little bit.
Yes,
The background of the question was, since we know the hydropower is actually not cheap, its initial cost is very high. At the same time, we are not getting any benefit to operate on the flexible operation, high price per kilowatt hour. So, and then not benefit as compared to the wind. The installation for the wind is much cheaper than the hydro. So the cost is very high. So should we have a kind of dedicated units just for this flexible operation? So that is one part of the cost. Second part is the all hydropower contribute little flexibility and then compensate the cost. So which option I was thinking, which seems to be suitable? Yeah, I am aware that it's fully complex system, river restrictions and restrictions from the government and the Salmon River and everything plays a role, and then spring flood and control of the flood mechanism. So everything plays a role. But in terms of the initial cost, is it better solution to have a dedicated unit for the flexible operations? Or should we use all units and contribute little by little to meet the required flexibility?
Can I try to answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think both can be true at the same time. I think you should, you must understand, as I said, analyze the pattern or try to understand the best you can what sort of what type of services each individual plant and unit is supposed to deliver, and design them accordingly. And that will mean that some of them will be more designed for stable operation, and some will be designed for more rough operation, and the sum of them will build up to the total to meet the total demand of flexibility.
And I think it's very it's hypothetical, but it's very interesting if you think that, okay, so let's restart and develop hydropower from scratch right now. And as you say, Chirag, it's the initial cost is really high, especially for the big dams. But with what we know now, we maybe would develop them in a more subtle manner for most places, and then we would focus some places where it's really suitable to have high flexibility, to really focus that on a few river stretches that are sort of just for that, and the rest would be much less environmental impact also, that you would be able to pass fish through and have bypass flows and all that sort of more North American style maybe. But that's sort of starting all over. It's difficult to to backtrack that now, I think.
But we're moving away from the design point already. So so the design point is it was designed, the Swedish system was designed in the 70s and up until the mid 80s maybe, and then we stopped, and then we haven't done anything. But now we're changing everything. So we should, it would be natural to adapt to this new situation.
Mm-hmm.
Can I comment? I fully agree with you guys. I think the most common question now I am asked from hydrosensors in Trondheim is, what is the cost of flexibility? Technically, and that's maybe quite an easy, if we can handle it, we can do research on it, but what is the environmental cost? And one thing we tend to forget, at least from our side, is the social acceptance of the flexibility. I think the wind turbine, the wind energy discussion in Norway right now is an example of how bad it can be. And we did have a same situation for hydropower as well. So I really think that we have to take care of that side of the story as well. Otherwise, we will not be able to include more flexibility into the system from hydropower. There are many costs. But when we are asked about the technical cost of flexibility, we don't have the answer, because we don't have much research or results to show it. So we have still a long way to go. So there has to be a market, but that market has to take the cost as well. And if you don't know the cost, how can you make sure you have a benefit, or you can have an economical upside of it? I don't know. It's still, we are still in early stages of this.
I think, I mean, there is the power plant owners, they have to somehow decide anyway, should I run or should I save the water, and what is the cost of starting or stopping. So I mean, we're trying to estimate as best, and we did an investigation after 1990 when the liberalization of the power market in Norway. There was a 10-15 years later was saying that all the operators were, no, the units were operated completely crazy. But we did a survey of 120 units in Norway, and the change in the first 10 years at least were not that significant, but we saw a tendency that the units that were well suited for more flexible operation, large Pelton units for instance, they were operated more flexible, and likewise then other units which were less. So we had both more units that had increased number of start, stop and large load changes, and also a large number of units that had decrease. Of course, it will be very interesting to try to now look at the next 10-15 years afterwards and see if we could repeat or what was the development of that trend. So that's something we've discussed several times. It's a difficult task to get access to those data, but at least it's very interesting.
I think Ole Gunnar mentioned a very important thing there also when it comes to this system scale flexibility of the wind power balancing, and that is the environmental cost of flexibility. And you should note that there is a large movement towards more ecological flows and fish passage solutions and all that, particularly at the European level.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that leads me a little bit into my question was, I mean, preparing for today, I had a quick look at this Swedish Energy Authority's Energiläget 2020 and compared it a little bit with this Norwegian Water and Energy Authority long-term power market analysis. And to me, it seems like at least in the Norwegian analysis had more focus on flexibility. And I mean, we have had a large debate in Norway regarding interconnectors, and a lot of the trade unions have been very much against, for instance, interconnectors and possibility of more flexibility exchange with Europe, for instance. So my question is how is the discussion on flexibility also in the public discussion in Sweden, or is it or maybe the environmental impact, or how is the discussion going in Sweden regarding flexibility on hydropower?
Who shall answer, Fredrik?
Yeah, I'm thinking I don't think it's sort of it's not in the public mind at all, is my impression. It's if you would describe it to people, they would understand that, yeah, okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, so that's how hydropower works, but it's I wouldn't say that there's anything that people have reacted upon that don't run this river so flexible, but it's of course with local exceptions. I guess people living close to some of our rivers really can see the variation in water levels and have opinions about that, but not sort of it's not in the news, so to say. Definitely not.
You hear the word flexibility more and more often, I think, but nobody really knows what they mean. So it's become a buzzword, I think, in Sweden, in some, not in the newspapers, but in debates, political debates, because we've had this big debate about this national plan for environmental adaptation of our rivers, which we're just moving into now, a 20-year period. But when it comes to flexibility, I think the Swedish discussion is still very focused on yearly energy balance. Are we importing or exporting on a yearly basis? On power deficit during the maximum load hour, still considered very important if you ask the Swedish transmission system operator, and to some extent ancillary services after this summer. And then, of course, the lack of transmission capacity in the grid has become a national issue, that particularly into the big city regions. So these things are discussed, but not how we will handle all this wind power in the north that we're building at the same time as we are taking nuclear power plants in the south out of operation.
But it's good to what you just said. It's maybe not in the news, but it's been it's an important topic in implementing environmental measures now due to the Water Framework Directive in Sweden. And that is just sort of about to start. And of course, decreasing or limiting the impact of the total production when it comes to energy has been sort of the big starting point. But still, I think the important discussion now is it is said that we should protect the flexibility of hydropower when implementing environmental measures. So that should be one factor to take into account. But it's so much more difficult than to say that no more impact than 1.5 terawatt hours when it comes to energy production, but what is sort of the maximum impact when it comes to flexibility? It's not defined, and it's we have tried, and I think we have come a long way in that, but that's much more challenging. So I guess that's where the flexibility discussion is right now.
Marius, could you say something? Is there any discussion in Germany regarding flexibility requirements or this, how that's impacting the development of the power system?
Yes, there is such a discussion as well. We're seeing the increasing amounts of RES units in Germany, the wind power, the PV units, and in amounts of I don't know the exact numbers now, but in amounts of 70, 80 gigawatts each. The question as well arises, which units the flexibility can provide in the future. And we have the phase out of the nuclear power plants to 2022, and the phase out of the coal-fired power plants to 2038. And the question the question arises where the flexibility can come from in the future. But the answer here in Germany is more from gas-fired power plants. We are expecting more capacity in that direction, and of course in more power electronics connected to the wind and PV units, which can provide flexibility as well.
Is it mentioned in the debate what kind of role that interconnectors with the Nordic region can play, or?
I think maybe only that's a minor aspect, because no one here in Germany would say we will answer those questions with the hydropower in the Nordics. I think policymakers here are focusing on solutions in Germany. But of course in Europe there Europe and the NSOE and so on are aiming at more electricity trading, more capacities between the countries, of course some flexibility can be provided by this more spatial coupling.
My guess would be that if you're looking on sort of the national level, both in Germany and Sweden, and I guess Norway also, that if you start to think about frequency stability and system integrity, then it's really difficult, not only for policymakers to make the case that, well, we will import that ancillary service that will keep the system stable finally. So I guess that would be troublesome in most countries. Another thing to sort of import, get a flexible energy source that sort of will maybe bring lower prices relatively, and sort of even out big chunks of renewable, intermittent renewables. But when it comes to sort of system stability, that's a different issue, I would guess. But how to solve it in Germany, I'm curious to find out.
Ancillary services are also more local, like naturally more local, particularly voltage stability, of course, but even also inertia, and it has to be a balance all over the synchronous system. So it's
I agree with you. At the same time, you see, at least I don't know exactly what the time scale for a full European integration, but at the moment there seems to be a very strong drive for a tighter integration in the Nordic, with this Nordic balancing model, Nordic frequency market, etc. So I mean, we are seems to be moving towards a very tight integration of the flexibility in the Nordic region, at least in terms of the markets. And then of course you will have still the interconnectors that are going to put some restrictions, but there seems to be a very strong let's say Nordic market development between the TSO, which is even not maybe discussed very much either, but that's another story.
It's at least the same synchronous system. I guess that makes it more natural.
Yeah, that's true. I'll open up for some final questions if there are any. Otherwise, we will start to round off this discussion. I will again use the opportunity to thank Marius and his team for a very interesting presentation. It's very interesting to see, let's say, this markets or these simulations and this development seen a little bit from, not far away, but from a little bit more distance than the typical actors that we have been collaborating with before. So it's good to get a little bit different view. At least for me, it's been enlightening. Again, I'll remind people to follow our website and follow the upcoming other webinars. We have recorded the whole session, so we'll clean up a little bit and then it will be posted on the website as well. So there will be opportunity to go back and look into more details regarding the structure of the models, etc. So for those who are interested in that. Otherwise, I will just thank both Johan and Fredrik also for a very interesting dialogue. And then I'll thank everyone for participating in this HydroFlex webinar and wish everyone a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Good luck, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.